Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of A Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is.
No, so the red light's on. We are live on LinkedIn and Facebook. My name's Pete Rushmer. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you know who I am because you're following my page. And I've got a wonderful guest for you all today, Mr. Jonathan Pittam. Some of you will hopefully have listened to the podcast. Actually, you were on the podcast. It must be a good year ago now, Jonathan, I reckon. Do you reckon it's about a year or even longer?
I think it's probably over a year, actually. Yeah, I think it's weird. The last couple of years have sort of warped a bit, haven't they? So it's hard to tell. I think it's over a year. Yeah,
I think it must be over a year, actually, to be fair. So it's been a while, and we've known each other a good couple of years, certainly pre-COVID for sure. We first sort of connected through HR Connect over coffee, I think, and we were introduced by John Henderson.
Yes.
Who is a mutual colleague of ours, who exists sort of in the transport and fleet sector. Fantastic chap. So, John, hopefully you're here and you're listening and enjoy what we've got to say. But Jonathan and I are going to be talking today about coping with stress in a transport office. It's Stress Awareness Month, and I thought it was a really good opportunity for us to talk particularly around the stress involved in the fleet sector, which Flagship Partners predominantly operate in, and fleet operates, because it is a really sort of stressful environment. And Jonathan and I have been preparing a webinar for the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and this is a good opportunity for us to sort of start to talk about or set the scene for, I suppose, some of those challenges. Jonathan, do you think that's sort of fair enough? Are you able to just give people a bit of an introduction, because you do a lot of mental health work, don't you, Jonathan?
Yeah. I think your first question. I think it's definitely a good way to sort of set up and get the ideas germinating around this. For anyone who's not met me, I'm a mental health educator, and that just means I work with organisations of all sizes to help leadership, pretty much people managers, enabled to have the skills to be able to reduce mental health related absenteeism, presenteeism, staff turnover. And it's just by helping people with those interpersonal skills, how to connect, how to notice, how to have conversations, all that sort of thing. Because a lot of people go into leadership without having those skills. They're promoted because they're good at what they do rather than being good with people. And they come up against a bit of an obstacle when they realise you've got to actually be able to support people. So I just fit in there and help them to develop those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you done much work with sort of in the fleet sector? I know you've done a webinar before, haven't you, for the Chartered Institute?
Yeah,
tell me about that, Jonathan.
Yeah, I talked to Michelle on the podcast. So we're talking about various things around men's mental health. I've worked with a couple of logistics companies around the drivers as well, specifically. And that was kind of what I was drew into the CALT things. It was about drivers and mental health. Because there's quite a lot of research out there about what are the problems, and it's there's all sorts of different ways of looking at it, but we were trying to get to the bottom of it. What is it that could help drivers in terms of their mental health? And a lot of it's not just around the job, a lot of it is around the person, helping the person with what's going on in their life as well, which is what they bring to work with them. So it's taken that sort of more indirect approach, should we say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think drivers particularly do find that there's a lot of challenges there, and one of our preferred driver CPC training courses at Flagship is the driver mental health course, where we essentially do like a mental health awareness, sort of raising awareness of drivers' mental health, and certainly some of the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis, as well as some of the things they can do to cope as well. What particularly for you stands out in the fleet sector as one of the sort of biggest challenges around? We were focusing sort of specifically around stress, because there's lots of different causes of mental health challenges, stress being one of them, and work-related stress is obviously a big challenge, particularly in the fleet sector. What do you think are sort of some of the main things that people will experience when they work in a busy transport office, whether it's from a driving point of view or a transport manager point of view? What sort of things do you think they'll come across?
Yeah, well, I think that in terms of the drivers, I mean, there's a whole host of things, aren't there? You know, there's the pressures, the time, the isolation, there's other drivers, there's a whole host of things that are outside of that person's sort of realm of control that they've got to be able to deal with. So I guess for certain people, that's going to be a real problem. For others, it might not be an issue at all. So I think it feels like there are so many factors the driver has to juggle compared to the average person who's maybe in the office on a daily basis or doing a different type of job. There's just so much they have to be able to deal with. And the fact they're on their own. So I think the isolation bit can come into it as well. Not that, I mean, a lot of people might like being on their own, but I think not having people around to talk to when things get difficult, because if you've got stuff going on in your life and you don't download on those things or do something with them, they just mount up and up and up, and it's you on your own all day long. And before you know it, the problems could start to arise. So I think there's that for the drivers. And then the driver managers, like what we spoke about before, Pete, was these things about you're switched on, you're on 24/7 fleet operation. People don't have any boundaries for around when they contact you. You've got no time for yourself, therefore any time to notice other people, then your work life, your home life struggles. And again, before you know it, that person's probably left to just take a more easygoing job on their lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that was sort of the crux of this session, was we were looking to explore that there is quite a bit of documented resource around drivers' mental health, the isolation, the different external pressures and challenges that drivers come across that will cause stress and cause mental health, potential mental health issues for them. But this one, you know, we really wanted to look at actually what goes on in the transport office, and particularly the pressures. With Flagship and Fleet Geeks, we deal a lot with transport managers, and that is particularly a very, very stressful role for people to take part in. And as you say, I see a lot of people moving away from that office-based transport manager role because they are struggling to cope with the pressure. Often large ratios of drivers who are reporting to a transport manager who's always on. You know, what would you say is a big challenge for transport managers around this sort of always on culture, which it really is an expectation in the transport sector? This 24/7 sort of dynamic is really challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe it's that culture again, where if that's expected of you, that's probably an issue in itself. But if you're expected to be switched on all the time, you're always in work mode. There's no downtime. The phone could ring at any point. You can't really just relax for a bit, can you? Can't ever just switch off and focus on your family or focus on, I'm going to get a good night's sleep, if you think that the phone might go off at 5 a.m. So it's that mind that's always in that place. It's always in work mode. And that's the sort of thing that can then lead to you burning out over time if you're never actually stepping away from that. It's not a good place to be. And some people are probably fine with that. But in general, most of us need to take our mind onto something else. You know, when people get home from work, they tend to switch off, or they go to the gym, they have a glass of wine or whatever it is. But their mind will hopefully be off work until they need it to be back onto the next day. But if these guys are 24/7, where does that switch off come? So maybe it doesn't ever come, and then they end up permanently switching off from it by leaving their job.
Yeah, which is obviously going to be a big challenge to find someone, because the legislation in the transport sector is so strict, and having someone who has that relationship and is that role, it's such a pivotal role for the business that actually we need to try and do more to protect people. And I'm just sort of putting it out there for both of us really to think about, as well as the listeners. How do we start to change that culture? How do we start to introduce new ways of working to try and reduce stress in the transport business?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably I guess the first thing with stress is as well, it's quite a broad term, isn't it? It's quite vague. So yeah. It encompasses overwork, it encompasses overwhelm, too much pressure. It encompasses a lot of things. So I guess initially I almost think actually using the word is almost a hindrance in itself, because it's like talking about happiness, isn't it? Happiness means different things to different people. I always say with stress, it's like you've got someone in France and someone in England, and they're both having a conversation about the local currency. One saying, "Oh, I love the local currency, it's brilliant. Oh, but I don't like this about it." They're both talking about the local currency, This one's talking about pounds, this one's talking about euros. So that they think they're talking about the same thing, but oftentimes when it comes to stress, two people are talking about two totally different things. So that would be the first place to start with it, really. Then I think it's around, if it is, usually it's overwhelm people mean. And I think what we're talking about here is overwhelm. The driver manager became overwhelmed with the pressures and having to juggle everything. How can we put support structures in place for that person? You know, what is it that person is struggling with particularly? Because I think everything, when it comes to stress or overwhelm, it has to be individual. Because what bothers one person won't bother another person. So it's what are the challenges for that particular driver manager in that particular company at that particular time? Then based on that, what can we build around them that makes it less likely they're going to want to leave because they're feeling overwhelmed? How can we get it so they enjoy their role? What can they share with other people? How can we give them time when they need to be more flexible about how they work? So really, rather than me standing here and saying this is what we should do, it's about a conversation with that particular driver manager. How can we work with you to make sure you enjoy what you're doing and you don't end up leaving 2 or 3 years down the line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does need to be really, really specific to that driver manager. And hopefully there's some transport business owners and company directors watching this and thinking, oh, actually, we have got a bit of a challenge here because our transport manager has to cope and deal with so much staff. We maybe really need to speak to them, him, her, around what we can do to support that. I think one of the interesting things I wanted to explore with you as sort of one of the concepts is this boundaries. And I think there's the culture around blurred boundaries where the expectation is the phone rings and it gets answered, and what companies can do to try and tackle that. What do you think to that, Jonathan?
Is that I guess that's probably quite a common thing, I guess. If someone's expected to be on 24/7, I've got a friend who works in recruitment who does warehouse staff, and he's 24/7 on. And he got to the point where it's just unbearable for him because he was always being let down quite a lot, but the phone rang at any time. It could ring any time. And I think it's I remember reading a book it was about a year living danishly, where it was, I think it was the editor of Elle magazine who went to live in Denmark with her husband. And she said that, talks about companies like Lego and things like that, where they said, you're not, if you're still in the office at 5 o'clock, that we don't look at that kindly. We think that's a failure on your part. If you're still doing this at that sort of time, that means you haven't got it done during the daytime. And they started all bringing in penalties for things where people were checking emails and stuff late at night. So really, I guess it has to be, a company has to think about how they could work with that manager to make it less attractive for them to be always switched on. So obviously there's the job that needs to be done, but then what else is there? Is the manager applying extra pressure on themselves that maybe could be shared with someone else? Because some managers like to take everything on their own shoulders, in organizations. So maybe is there a bit of self-inflicted pressure as well? But I think here's the job that needs to be done. How can we make that manageable for that individual? But again, it's a question, what would that manager want that to look like? Rather than saying, here's what we're going to do for you, Pete, we're going to do this for you. No, let's say, Pete, how would you like us to do this for you? And then maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. It's like this collaborative approach around, we notice there's a challenge here. How can we do that? And control is such a big issue because it's actually in the transport legislation, a transport manager who is named on an operator's license, they have to have what's called continuous and effective control of the fleet and the drivers. So there is this element of continuous and effective control. So people will take that quite literally, which is that they essentially 24/7, I need to have full control of this fleet of drivers and vehicles and that kind of thing, when actually it doesn't. I don't believe that it's saying that you need literal hands-on control. I think that demonstrates possibly a lack of skill or understanding from a management point of view. Continuous and effective control is around having measures and controls in place that help you effectively manage that fleet business, because it can't be one person. That person needs to have downtime, they need to have holiday, they need to have a break, like you say, because the potential for burnout's huge.
Yeah, that instruction, that bit of literature sounds like it was written for a robot, perhaps, doesn't it? You could have a piece of machinery that's continuously in operation, but even that piece of machinery, you've got to at some point turn it off to give it a bit of maintenance. So I think, if you leave something on 24/7, it's going to burn out eventually, isn't it? So maybe if we know that happens to machines, let's think about people who are probably far less durable than pieces of equipment, and think about how we balance that. It's that, there's this whole work-life balance thing. I'm always a bit skeptical about that term, but I always think of it as time when you're switched on to your role and time when you're switched off from your role. You could be at work and your mind could be at home on the golf course. So that's still downtime. It's about where your mind is, I think. That's the most important thing. It's not where your body is, it's where your mind is. And I think people need to have that almost interval-based approach to productivity, where you're working at high intensity, then you come down.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. At Flagship Partners, we take road safety really seriously, and we're your road safety partnership. We help transport companies with compliance and training across their businesses, including first aid, driver CPC, and other transport management services. So if you're FORS accredited or you want to improve your operator compliance risk score, give Flagship Partners a call today.
Up and down, rather than trying to do like steady state marathon running, where you're always operating at one intensity, short bursts of intensity. But whether that could be applied to a driver manager's role, I'm not sure. That's for each individual company and driver manager to agree and explore between them.
Yeah, I think there'll be some people who probably listen back to this, might be listening as we speak, or watch back later on, and they'll think, and really the purpose of this video, I think, for both of us, is to get people thinking about it. We're not saying this is the answer, like you alluded to before. The outcomes, or the outcomes generated from watching and listening to this conversation will be unique to each individual and each individual business, because they will have their own pressures, and the individuals themselves, the way they cope and manage, and their perspective of stress is different, and their ability to cope with the demand and the resource they have available to them. But I guess we're kind of asking more questions than we're answering, which is, we need to say, have a conversation and look at what resources available in your business, because there are certain facts which are, like you say, we aren't robots, so we can't have continuous and effective hands-on management of something. We need to put systems and processes in place, and we need to have a team of people, however big that team may need to be, to cope with the demand of the role. I think is probably a good way of looking at it. Would you say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it comes back to the conversation, doesn't it? Because there could be all the guesswork in the world, but until that person throws up something that personally affects them, maybe people around them who are making decisions won't have realised those things. That's why it always has to come from the person. But and the fact that we're talking about things I just mentioned about using an interval basis to this, whereas obviously if someone's got to be on 24/7, you can't do that. But hopefully, and John probably would appreciate this, we're trying to do a bit of lateral thinking here. Let's think about things that we know we can't do them, but it doesn't matter. It still gets us thinking, actually, what could we do? So we can't do interval based, but we don't have to, what we're doing at the moment's not working. What else is there? And I think that's it. So we've got to be creative with these things, because otherwise, the way it's working at the moment, isn't working for a lot of people, is it? The on 24/7 might be working for the company, but it's not. If it's not working for the individual in the long term, it's not working for the company either, because they'll have to replace that person. So, in terms of taking a long-term approach, it's about making situations more comfortable for the individual who's in them. I think that's the thing. And the only person who knows the answers there is that person, and they might not have been asked. Once they get asked, they might think, now that I realise you actually care, I'll start thinking about solutions. But I didn't think you cared. I just think thought you wanted me 24/7 robotic. But now you've asked, I really appreciate that. Let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in my experience, I've come across a lot of guys and girls in the role who they like to have that element of control. But I think what we need to look at is, as well as looking at the individual and their needs, let's also look at what their development needs may be. What does it take for them to build a support structure around them, and how can we support and enable people to do that? It's okay saying, well, you've got this resource and you've got that resource, but if that resource isn't working quite right, it might not be people, it might be systems or software. There's lots of different ways of overcoming the time and control pressures that are required. I think, what we're saying is that we respect and understand that essentially that this business is 24/7, but we need to have a grown-up conversation around how we actually facilitate that happening. And it might be that the individual, the fleet manager, the driver manager, needs to have some level of professional development to recognize where other people may be better suited to carry out certain tasks, or to be able to delegate certain roles amongst a team of people, and the resource needs to be put in place to do that. Because the impact, and I think sort of coming on to the impact of stress, regardless of what someone's individual experience of it is it can have long-term consequences for people from a physical health point of view as well, can't it?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I come at it from the angle of, when someone says they're stressed, it's the way their behaviours change due to that I think has the impact. So let's say if I say I'm a transport manager, I'm feeling completely burnt out and I'm stressed up to the eyeballs. I'm not sure whether it's the stress itself, because we need to determine what that actually is that we're talking about there. But it's suddenly I might think, well, I'm not sleeping as well because I'm having to work constantly. I can't switch off after work, so I'm going to have a couple of beers at night. I've stopped exercising because I don't have any time to do it because of my shift. I feel really moody the next day because I'm getting woken up at 5 a.m. by calls. All of those things have a knock-on impact, because if you deprive someone of sleep, let's not forget the Red Army use sleep deprivation as their main form of torture. If you deprive someone of sleep, you can get pretty much anything to confess to anything. So it's all those things that knock on the lifestyle, in the sleep, the alcohol, lack of exercise, all those things. How if someone's tired, they'll eat more sugary processed carbohydrates. Therefore, they're going to be sugar crashing all day long as well, and all those things. So I think it's the knock-on impacts of being overwhelmed that really can have the effect down the road. Because if someone isn't sleeping, eating loads of refined carbohydrates, drinking a lot more than they need to, 5 years down the line, think of those little investments or poor investments in their health. That's what we're going to be looking at further down the line. So I think that's where the real health impacts come along. And someone who has all those problems, isn't sleeping, isn't in a good emotional place, drinks a bit much, isn't going to be able to fight off diseases or illnesses that might come along as well. So therefore, it's all of these knock-on effects over time, just starting from that bit of overwhelm or stress in their life, all of those knock-on effects. So how can we prevent those things happening so we don't have this catastrophe in 2-3 years down the road?
Absolutely. And do you know what I think? The other thing is we also need to recognise that potentially the stress, the stress that people deal with, they start to shut down almost and operate more like zombies than productive people, and the decision making's worse, and the interaction with team members is worse, and there's this overall deterioration in the way that person's going to operate. So we can either try and ignore it and pretend it's not happening, which is of course an option, and some people will be listening out, or they can take a really sort of proactive approach to it and start to address and discuss these issues, because they realize that whilst it's an investment in somebody, the payback can be immediate, because if someone's well rested, they're slept, they're eating a healthy diet, they're physically fit and healthy, the chances of having sudden negative impacts to the business of someone being absent or off sick, of the continuity of being able to manage that fleet actually becomes a proactive task, because essentially it's a bit like I suppose my line of thinking is around, the HGVs cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. You wouldn't just let it run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without. We've kind of gone full circle back to what you were saying earlier, and I'm on the same page with you there. that vehicle has to stop every 6 weeks and get safety inspected to make sure that everything's okay. It needs to have its oil topped up. It needs to, have make sure the nuts are tightened and all of that sort of stuff. And it will have to have a filter changed and a belt replaced here and there, and all of that stuff is sort of preventative maintenance to stop a breakdown. Well, if we treat our machinery that way, we definitely need to treat our people that way.
Technically, I guess we're treating the lorries better than the people then, aren't we?
I think we are, actually.
Yeah, which says a lot, really. I think there was that saying, you can always tell a lot about society by the way it treats its weakest or something like that. So I guess if it's like, you look at a society, how it treats its animals, that tells you a lot about society. No, I'm not obviously referring to people as animals, but I'm saying the people, if we're not looking after animals, we're probably not going to be nice to each other. If we're not going to be looking after our lorries, we're probably not going to be nice to our drivers and our driver managers, So I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's where our priorities lie. That lorry has probably cost a couple of £100,000. So therefore it's like, whoa, this cost me a fortune. I'm going to look after it with regular maintenance. This person hasn't cost you as much. But actually, if you think about it in the long term, absence, having to replace them, having to retrain someone to do their job, it will probably cost you not far off a portion of what a lorry would cost. So if money is your sole motivator for an organization, you've got to think about these things. Attracting a new driver manager, training them up, the lost productivity while the new one's getting up to the same level as the previous one. All of those things are massive expenses. So yeah, if we're willing to put that time, money investment into our lorries, let's put some of that into our people as well, because I think we'll get far more from investing in the people on the long term than we'll from investing in the lorries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
that's not saying it's a zero-sum game or anything. I'm not saying you should either it's one or the other. I'm saying let's invest in both of them.
Definitely. I think that it's just so tangible for businesses to see the physical assets that they own, and realizing the impact of the downtime that has on them, and actually often don't realize the tangible impact of the people side of the business. And hopefully people by watching this video and listening to us just have a bit of a, it's been a totally off the cuff conversation around stress, around people not getting time out from their busy routine, and the impact that can have. Hopefully that'll have maybe switched a few light bulbs for them to have a think about it. Jonathan, just whilst I've got you, if people are interested to sort of learn more about how you can help them with these things, how do they get in touch with you, and what are some of the things that you do to help support people?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. I'm pretty much all over the place. I've got a podcast as well, the Headstrong Talk Show. But if you want to catch up with me, I'm on my website's mindbodyconsulting.co.uk, and it's primarily I work with managers. It's training the leadership team, the people managers, on how to do all the things that involve looking after your staff, supporting them while they're struggling, noticing any struggles, and that ultimately rewards the business by reduced absence costs, reduced staff turnover, presenteeism, and all that, and hopefully it ends up with a greater morale in the workforce as well.
Brilliant. I really, really appreciate you coming on and speaking to me, Jonathan. I feel like we've got the makings of a really good webinar around this for the Chartered Institute. So if you're listening and you're a member of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, Jonathan and I will be speaking. I think we haven't firmed the date up for certain, but we're going to be speaking about stress and driver managers and transport managers and the overall transport operation and some of the strategies people can use to deal with that. And we're going to be going with that in early July at the moment is the plan. So really look forward to seeing you there. I'll just say my piece, which is at Flagship, we're starting to build a community called Fleet Geeks. We've got a group on Facebook. Please do come over and join us. We've got the podcast, the Fleet Geeks podcast, where myself, Jamie, and Mike talk about. I lost his name for a minute. Then I've just gone live and my mind's gone blank. Mike, and we talk about fleet operations. We're there to support fleet managers, and we're launching a peer-to-peer group where transport managers can start to spin wheels on these ideas and talk about best practice and start to collaborate and work together around how they've overcome these things. Because it is a clear challenge in the fleet sector, which is we know that we need to have continuous and effective management of our fleet and our vehicles. Road safety is vitally important. and there is no compromise there at all. We're absolutely saying there's no compromise. What we are saying is that one person can't make all of those wheels spin. If you've got a fleet of vehicles and a fleet of drivers, we need to have a team of people who can ensure that there's this coverage over a 24/7 period, and that the people in the team have got the skills to be able to support and offer a robust management system, because one person cannot do that job. We need to ensure that we look after ourselves and we don't create fatigue and burnout, and have people operating at their best in our businesses, because that's the right thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, that sounds like you're doing some really good stuff. And if I can just add to that as well, because I think the work you're doing there, Pete, sounds brilliant. And it's this thing, we talked about the lorry maintenance. If you look at a lorry, you can see that it's deteriorating over time if you pay attention to it. And obviously a company will think, right, we need to do something here, let's do some maintenance. But the same thing isn't as visible in the driver manager, is it? As they're deteriorating over time, like the lorry that's constantly worked, they're both deteriorating over time, but it's harder to notice the deterioration in the driver manager unless you look, unless you ask. So hopefully people take that as a bit of an analogy. It's that think of them, you can think of them the same way. If you're working them both into the ground, they are deteriorating over time. One is just really obvious, the lorry, whereas the driver manager isn't. But it doesn't mean it's not happening because you can't see it. It's just you're not noticing it. That's all it is.
Absolutely brilliant. And on that, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. And people who have listened and listening now and listening in the future, really, really appreciate it. Please do follow Jonathan and I, and we'll hope to see you again soon on our work. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Pete.
I really hope you loved today's episode. And if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel and my business Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.